Today on Building the Open Metaverse.
Metaverse is like a new country. And when you think about the four factors of productions, they are land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurship, which is very important to create something. Like in the real world, we need those four factors.
Welcome to Building the Open Metaverse, where technology experts discuss how the community is building the open metaverse together. Hosted by Patrick Cozzi from Cesium and Marc Petit from Epic Games.
Hello, my name is Marc Petit. I'm from Epic Games, and my co-host is Patrick Cozzi from Cesium. Hey, Patrick. How are you?
Hey, Marc. I'm doing well. I know the economy is in a lot of people's minds, so I'm looking forward to talking about the digital economy today with a recognized expert.
Today, we would like to welcome Dirk Lueth, the co-founder and co-CEO of Upland, to the podcast. Upland is one of the largest blockchain-based metaverse with over millions of users. And Dirk, it's fantastic to have you on the show. You're also the chairman of the Open Metaverse Alliance 3, OMA3, which is a very important organization. We're so happy to have you with us.
Oh, hey, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, of course.
Yeah, and Dirk, we always start the show by asking how our guest got started with the metaverse. So tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to the metaverse.
So my journey starts actually when I was still at school, at the university. Actually, I wrote a PhD, or my dissertation was about private and state-controlled currencies. And then in 2011, I found out about Bitcoin and was super excited from day one. And at the beginning, there were not a lot of use cases around it, right? Basically, it was a currency, and that was all of it. And I was then, dabbling around a little bit over the time. And then in 2018, actually, I put together myself with Manny Honigstein and Dan Zuckerman, my two co-founders of Upland. They were coming from the gaming space, and I told them about this currency. And so we said, what can we do, right? This is such an exciting new technology. And we came up with the idea of, taking the inspiration of Monopoly, taking the real world and taking actually blockchain, put that all together and create Upland. And that was basically already in 2018. And when you look at our URL, it's called upland.me for metaverse. At that time, no one was actually talking about the metaverse. The word was around, obviously, for a while, but it was not hyped or nothing was not in mainstream media and so on. So at the beginning, we said, you know what, let's try to avoid that word metaverse because no one really knows what it is. So at the beginning, when you look at our first marketing material, when it came out, we always were talking about a parallel world, virtual world, and we're still trying to find it. And then, of course, everything has changed. And in 2021, basically, when it became a mainstream word. And that's a little bit my journey. But in general, I was always excited about this, these parallel worlds. I love those movies, Matrix and Ready Player One, that all contributed to inspiration of Upland.
And you're also a born entrepreneur, if I'm not mistaken. So
that was always my life. So I started two companies in Germany. One was the Financial Times of Germany newspaper. I continued then split on in fintech space. As I said, I'm an economist, and I was also very attached to the whole entrepreneurial, scene also here where I live right now in Silicon Valley. I moved from Germany in 2009 to Silicon Valley, and I was mentored to over 30 startups. I helped raise them, capital, enter the US market. So it's always fun, to come up with new ideas, to go in directions no one has gone before. That always fascinated me. When we started out back then in very early in 2018, of course, we first ourselves have to understand what it means to create a parallel world. And when the question came up and we started talking to, first of all, we talked to investors, then we talked to potential partners, but we found ourselves always talking the same thing. People have so little knowledge. They always wanted to know about it, but they didn't, but they always ever asking the same questions over and over again. And we said, why don't we do just, simple, like an ebook, like 3-4 chapters where we explain things. And when we met someone or we're going to meet someone, hey, do you want to read that? So you have some basic information. However, Wiley, our publisher, then, got the word of it, that we are doing this. And then they approached us and said, hey, why don't you write a book about the metaverse? And that's when we put the content together back in when was that actually, get 2 years together in 21, late 21. We started writing it actually over the holidays. My wife was very happy because I was always busy with the book. And then we published it, right? And we're quite proud to say, was one of the on the top list of Amazon for a while, bestseller on Amazon, and because it was quite early, and it has helped actually a lot for lots of people to understand, okay, what are the basic assumptions, what are the basic definitions of the metaverse.
Yeah, fascinating. It is called Navigating the Metaverse.
I loved just sharing the background and the analogy to Monopoly for Upland. And I was wondering, for our folks in our audience who might not know about Upland, could you talk a bit more about it and how users use it?
Yeah, so using the analogy of Monopoly is always quite adventurous. To date, I have not found not one person who didn't know what Monopoly is. So it's always easy to explain that, right? And that's when we say we are mapped to the real world. So we're currently live actually in 20 cities across the US. So you don't have to be in those cities to play, but it's very simplistic, game mechanic. And when you think about Monopoly, we have to purchase streets and then collect them, and then you can build something on it. That's also how Upland pretty much started as well. So we actually took the real world parcels, right? It's not just, some squares, random squares you can draw. So the real world parcels, we use that data where you can purchase a property. Instead of, buying a full street, you buy a property, and then you start earning a small income on it or yield. Right now, it's actually 14% in order to incentivize, more activity in the whole ecosystem. But you can increase that very much like in Monopoly. You can increase that yield by completing collections, the same properties on the same streets or through museums or so, and that gives you a small, increase in your income here. So that's how we started out with Upland back in 2019 in the closed beta, and then in early 2020. Of course, Upland is much more than this today. Today, you can build a house or different structures on your property. We have, we introduced cars in Upland. You can buy a car, you can do a car racing, you can actually race through virtual San Francisco, which is exciting, or our users, our community create their own racetracks, which we have. We have so-called treasure hunts. You can hunt across the cities and, be the fastest and find some treasures. We have interesting partnerships, in the US. We have a partnership with the NFL Player Associations, for instance. Then we did the FIFA World Cup, where you were able, to, buy actually also the videos, not directly. We all gamified it. So when you want to get to the goal of Messi, of the final, actually, you actually had to go to Upland to get it. So, which is, because we always believed, that the metaverse is important, that, it can, when you go there, it's just an empty room. That's probably not so exciting. You always have to do something to do around it, right? That's why we always gamify things. We're coming from the gaming space / blockchain space, and that's how we build Upland.
You start with the land, then you build on it, and then you create experiences for engagement.
So right now we position Upland as a metaverse super app. What that means is that we actually launched just very quietly to a third-party developer platform. Now third-party developers can build their own apps on top of Upland. They don't need to have blockchain knowledge. So we, as we're obfuscating, the whole blockchain layer for our users, right? Maybe I've not mentioned that before. Is in Upland we have iOS and we have Android app. We have strong mobile first thinking. You can use credit card and PayPal, so you don't need to deal with private keys and wallets and all the complicated stuff of blockchain, which makes it really mass consumer friendly. And the same is also for the developers now. So you can actually use your existing skills. You don't need to understand the protocols and all what's behind it. And now you can launch your own apps on top of Upland. And what that means is actually that let's say you take a property somewhere in Upland where you launch your experience, and the users can then go and can take assets and their identity with them. So we just recently, for instance, launched identity-wise an avatar also with Ready Player Me, where you can actually take your avatar into this other experience. And you can also take your assets. We have an in-app currency, which is called Apex, which is not tradable on exchanges for regulatory reasons in the US. However, you can take that asset, but to this other experience or game and use it there, or your NFTs and use it there, right? And you can take it back out again. So that is what we enable for the developers. That is one part of the so-called super app. The other big component is that we're adding now a very strong social layer around Upland. We just introduced chat, and going forward, we're going to have cafes and so on. So Upland's going to be more and more evolve also to a social network where people hang out together and just have fun and do lots of interesting stuff.
We could just jump in a little bit to give the audience a sense of the scale, like maybe how many owners, how many users, how many developers are using the platform today.
Today, when you take landowners, by far the largest metaverse, blockchain-based metaverse. So we have over 300,000 landowners now. And in terms of daily active users, it's still small for when you compare it to normal games. But for blockchain, we're quite big. It depends. It goes between 30 and 80,000 daily active users. It always depends when we launch something special and what's it depends on the activities people can do, because we have a live operations in Upland. That means there's always something happening, and then it's a reason to come back. Also, where we're very proud of, for instance, when you talk about game metrics, our D7 retention, so people are coming back after 7 days, is over 60%. So right now, I think it's around 65-ish%, which is also very strong for a mobile game as such.
We had Yatsu on the podcast, so I think, how do you say it? Are you part of the Animoca group, or you were part of that environment, right?
Well, Animoca is an investor in us, but they don't have, not by far, not any majority shares or so, right? The company is still completely controlled by the founders. I mean, they just led our last investment round. We raised 18 million on a 300 million valuation, made it public also in late 21. And Yatsu, who also wrote the foreword in the book, he's also on the board, and he's the chairman of Animoca. But that's our connection. And Animoca and us, we all carry actually the same vision of the Open Metaverse. So together with Robbie Young, I'm on the board of the Open Metaverse Alliance. Robbie Young is the CEO of Animoca. So we're doing lots of things together. But in Upland, they're just in quotation marks an investor.
Yeah, that was why I was getting at, you see being able to leverage that proximity with the other Animoca portfolio companies. We had Seb Bourget from the Sandbox here on the podcast, and in terms of land ownership and having creating a real ecosystem through cross activation, cross compatibility. Is that part of the plan?
We have a Slack together with Animoca, right, where we exchange and we come up with ideas. The problem is always, with partnerships, right? It's because it's still, that's probably going to touch a little bit on that a little bit later on the podcast. But it's still not, even the blockchain space, nothing is really standardized yet, which makes it hard to be really interoperable and to use things in multiple places.
A good point. There are many metaverse type experiences today. And you're adding on top of traditional games mechanic, you're adding elements of digital ownership and full economies as part of the core of the experience. So tell us about this, and do you see commonality emerge? I mean, do you see a trend towards a standardized way of doing that?
Of course, I'm biased, but I think in the future, blockchain games, blockchain based metaverses, they will have a much stronger value proposition for the users because of the property aspect. I always compare that like in real life, right? Let's say you're driving your car in Germany, and then you say, hey, I'm going to cross now the border to France. Well, I have to leave my car at the border. And I cannot use it. I have to buy a new car and do everything new. That's complicated, and it's first of all, it's not good for the users, and it's also not good for engagement as such, right? So I believe that in the future, goods, assets will be transferable, and this will increase activities in those virtual worlds. And why is property rights so important is that is one example, but I always use another example is, let's say, in real life, when you own a house, right, you really take care, right, you beautify it, you repair it and whatever. When you're renting a house, not so much, right, because you say, oh, maybe one day I'm out anyways, and so on. And this is also, we've seen that when people own stuff, they really, really care, and that makes it such a big difference, because now you can, when you own it, you can build stuff on top of it. Maybe you can mix it with other things. You can maybe also rent it out to someone, right? And earn money with it because you own it, right? So there's a lot of things which actually favor ownership in the metaverse. But that is only one part. Is when you think about the metaverse, and here's the economist who's coming through, right? The metaverse is really like a new nation state where you have 4 factors of production, right? And I had a long email exchange actually with Mark Cuban one day, because he said, why do you need land in the metaverse? Why do you need to sell it? He said, I'm not going to use the word here to protect the podcast, but said what he said is dumb as whatever. And but I think that perspective is not correct. The reason why I'm saying that is, when I say the metaverse is like a new nation state, it's like a new country. And when you think about the 4 factors of productions, they are land, capital, labor, and entrepreneurship, which is very important to create something. When we follow that assumption that is what the metaverse is, right, then it's exactly the same way like in the real world. You need those 4 factors. I mean, that is a classical view on macroeconomics. There's other views. I'm just to simplify it right now. So you need land, right, and the resources in order to build something on it, right? So you need to. So when someone owns it, very much like life, you need to have it physically in the physical space, but also in the digital space. So you want to build a house, something on it, or maybe you want to build a racetrack, or I don't know, whatever. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the capital. So you need machines, right, to build something, right? You need also the money to build it, right? So it's also here. Then the third thing is you need labor. You need the people who are doing it, right, who are getting paid for it. And the last but not least, you need the entrepreneurs. So that's exactly the 4th factor. And that's exactly the same thing in the metaverse. And that's why we always say also Upland is the entrepreneurial metaverse, because people can run and operate shops in Upland, can make businesses, not just by speculating, but by creating goods and selling those to others, and because others like what has been created there. And that's what is important. The entrepreneurship drives everything forward. And that's exactly the same thing in the metaverse, what you have in real life and in the digital life. I don't see any difference here.
So Dirk, maybe this is a good segue where we could back up and just talk about the digital economics from just maybe some of the general metrics that you look at in Upland, or it's UPX, pools, the earnings rate.
The foundation of the Upland economy. So first of all, we have a token which is called UPX, which has a fixed exchange rate to the US dollar. So $1 equals 1,000 UPX, and we're not changing that rate, right? Also to give users, the understanding, okay, when a price of a good changes, of a property or of a virtual car changes in Upland, it's not because of some external macroeconomic, things which have happened, right? It's just because of the internal economy in Upland. So that's one thing to make it easier for users to use. So this is, because also money has, 3 functions always. It's a, unit of account, unit of store of value, and utility, right? So that's where that's also where UPX comes in, but it's primarily, of account and of utility. So that's when you need UPX in Upland in order to purchase something, you can, as I mentioned, buy it easily with fiat currency, with your dollars, credit card, or in-app purchases, iOS and Android. So that's the first token which we have. Then we have a second token which is called Spark. And Spark is a token which you need to have, which you need to stake when you want to build something in Upland. So let's say you want to build a house, you need to stake Spark, right, in order to build it. So in Upland, because we're always replicating the real world on purpose, we built in, this little bit gamification element, friction. So it's not that you build a house and it's immediately, it's there. It takes actually days or weeks in order to build the house. the more you now stake Spark, the faster you build the house, right? And now you can ask other players, hey, can you stake, for me? Then, the house gets built faster. So, and then we will also have a third token, which is not yet introduced. The working title is STEM. STEM supports life in Upland. So, when you have a plant and so on. So, but that's a little bit our thinking. But back to Apex. So Apex actually, we have two pools in Upland. One is called the Upland pool and one is called the community pool. The Upland pool is actually which funds us as the operator, as Upland, we need to make money in order to pay our people in the organization. So when someone buys Apex with US dollars, right, this goes out of the Upland pool. We collect, of course, the dollars, right? Users gets the Apex, can purchase something in Upland. So that's the pure Upland pool. But however, then we also have what we call the community pool. And the community pool is which actually supports what we call the velocity in the system. Because what we want is actually that there's more and more transactioning happening between the players. So it gets a self-sustaining economy. So how does this work? So when you want to buy now on the secondary market a property from another player, right? The buyer and the seller, they both have to pay 5% fees, but Upland or we not getting this goes into the community pool. Out of the community pool, then we pay the yield, what people earn for the properties. Yeah. And then we have a lot of inflows and outflows out of that pool. So you can also get outflows in sense of when you find a treasure, I mentioned the treasure hunts, right? You were paying that out of that, right? So that's other thing, how money gets into the pools, but then also other fees, where people have to pay. So that's how we create that. But that basically, that is the community pool owned by the quotation marks by the community, which drives our economy.
You gave some examples on elements or lessons from real world economics and how you kind of build them into Upland. Were there any other like inflation that you've looked at?
Upland currently does not have really inflation because we have a defined numbers of Apex, which we had put into the pool. However, we can always, we said it also in a white paper, we can add additional Apex into it as such, right? But we have to be very careful, and also that is actually because when we, of course, we are in quotation marks handing out those Apex when people earning the yield, because this has been programmed into the community pool. But that has to be, we have to pay attention that we're not giving out too much Apex free, or let's say as yield, because this risks then the economy, right? Because if there's too much, right, then that goes too much up as such. Technically, that is not inflation, right? I've always discussions with other people, but technically it's not. It's just, that we give people the opportunity to buy out of their yield additional things. So when we started out with Upland, actually the yield was 17%. Because why did we do that? Because we want to incentivize people to buy more properties, to trade properties, and so on. So to create the activity, right? But however, we lowered that a few months back to 14% because we always said that we're going to lower it. Maybe we're also going to increase it. That's a little bit our monetary policy, right? In order to avoid that there's too much Apex out there, which will have an impact on the economy, which we do not want to have. Yeah. So and that is then our role also as such, right? There are certain ways that I thought I would never use it. Actually, again, my research work when I was back at the university, right? We are acting somehow like a central bank here, right? So we're controlling the yield. And we do actually also control other monetary measures in order to protect the stability of the economy. Because our most important objective is to create a stable economy. Of course, people sometimes complain, prices are falling, I lost money and so on. But that is because it's a market economy, right? Because especially in crypto, people were used to, it always goes up, I always get more, right? And now everyone woke up, with a downturn and everyone, now I lost money, right? But at the end of the day, Upland is like this as well. However, the secret sauce is that you actually try to minimize the speculation part of it and you increase the economic activity which comes out of value creation, right, and of velocity between the users. So, and that's why our users actually were quite shielded from that downturn, because we had the fixed exchange rate. So everything which happened in the economy of Upland was not really indirectly connected to crypto, but not directly. Right. And of course, because the overall market is a little bit down, and then of course prices go lower. Right. So, but we have also seen phases where prices also go up again. Right. Also, especially even in the last half year when the downturn was there, we had a higher demand in certain areas where people were starting building so-called nodes, where community got together and so on. We're seeing, prices are going up. So it's a true market economy what we're building here.
And Dirk, I think that analogy to the central bank is a good one. I was actually going to say as custodians, perhaps, of a healthy economy. I was wondering, on that note, if there's any other KPIs that you may look at to kind of, measure the health of the economy?
Yeah, we're looking at all different, how much are people building, right? So how much are they using? How much are staking Spark? What is the secondary market transactions, per day, per week, and such. We have tons of those kind of KPIs we're looking at, right? And we're seeing, okay, is there any alarms? Is it going to the wrong directions? Yeah. So that's, and then we have to actually adjust, our either we create new activities, to create more demand for Apex, right? Or we find also, sometimes you need also Apex sinks, where people actually can spend money and in order to create demand for new Apex.
Wow, the complexity is impressive. We had Phil Prosdale on the show, and I was on the other side of the spectrum. Second Life is a very simple model with a property tax and a VAT, and now we're seeing way more sophisticated systems. But they're centrally managed. That's also what's interesting. You're acting like the government of that. And you need an economic policy, and you need a fiscal policy. So it's interesting.
Of course, when you think about blockchain, everyone says, oh, everything has to be super decentralized and so on. But the truth is actually, when you think about an economic system, there's a cost of centralization, a curve for cost of centralization and cost of decentralization. And where those two curves meet, that's the optimum for a society, for an economic system. And that's exactly how also we think. At the beginning, Upland was much more centralized than maybe other blockchain games. But we said we want to be in control, because when you think about when the economy is very small, right? Let's say you have 10 players and there's one player who, looks for loopholes and tries to, exploit the economy, then this has a big impact. Yeah. So, and we need to be able to counter that. And the same thing is when you have 1,000 people in the economy, a million, 10 million, right? This one person, of course, then you get a little bit more maybe, right? Don't have that much of an impact anymore. And we always said as Upland, as the operator, over time, we want to pull back. And we want to give actually more and more authority back to the community. How we exactly going to manage that? Some things you can do on chain, so-called. Some things need to be managed through a DAO or through a foundation where people can vote and so on. So we're constantly thinking of these kind of governance models, but it's constantly evolving. But it clears for us that we want to actually step further out of the the ring in the future and let the community decide over that. Let the field government can run for it. It's a big vision. Let's see how far we can get. But that's what was always day one thought. Maybe one thing I also want to add is, because I always get asked, well, how do you deal with all those people who are exploiting the system? So for instance, in Upland, you're not allowed to have multiple accounts, right? Because obviously otherwise you can funnel assets and so on, which then destroys the game mechanics. So we have actually a fraud team observing that. But the funny thing is, in blockchain, you cannot take assets away from people, right? When someone bought something, right, it's impossible, right? We cannot do that, right? And So what we said, okay, when someone's doing fraud, we're sending them. Actually, here in San Francisco, there's an island. Maybe most of your listeners might know it. It's called Alcatraz, and then they get sent to Alcatraz. And in Alcatraz, they cannot actually do any certain transactions anymore. They're very expensive, right? So they can justify themselves. Maybe sometimes there was the same IP, and maybe the partner played also, and usually we observe that and we see how assets are moving in Upland and so on, and then of course you can get out of the jail again, right? But then you have to explain yourselves. But it's difficult sometimes, right? Because you all of a sudden you become a judge, and it's sometimes very complex. It's not that easy.
So digital democracy, digital justice, you're building it all. And switching gear to another topic, as you're designing this amazing virtual world, something very important is diversity, inclusion, and equality. Something we may be lacking in the real world. So we had Karen Becker here on the podcast, who's specialized in DEI and designing for justice a few episodes back. So is it something that you think about, designing for justice and accessibility and making sure that even people with different economic means can actually engage into the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, we have a problem in the metaverse space, right? And the blockchain is very, we have had a high education and all that stuff. So we have to watch out that there's not a digital divide. That's also why I'm a little bit skeptical, because especially in the blockchain space, right, you always read the headlines, this property has been sold for 2 million and this for 3 million, right? Who can afford that in real life, right? So who can really do this? It's just maybe the very rich people, crypto rich people, and so on. So in Upland, it's different. We are very inclusive. So in Upland, you can actually get started. First of all, you can grind your way up, right? If you play, then you can get there, or you can buy a property for $2 or $3, right? Of course, there are more expensive properties also out there, but that's where we believe, okay, it's much more inclusive, so it's more accessible for more people. The second thing is also that we want to raise a lot of awareness for different groups. As I said, we are live in Brazil, and for instance, we have a partnership with UNICEF in Brazil, where we actually sponsored, trainings, and we sponsored also computers, right, for kids who don't have access to computers, and to explain them, okay, what is Web3, how does it work, and with Upland they can actually learn it, how to use it, right? So that's a little bit how we're supporting them, doing these kind of approaches to the metaverse and to be more inclusive. But I completely agree with you. The metaverse is still a, let's say, very open space where we have to be careful that where we have to avoid harassment and all these bad things which are happening, unfortunately, also in the internet. And it can be actually worse in the metaverse, right? We have to, unfortunately, set certain rules, and the question is always, how far should those rules go? Should they be self-governed? It's not a very easy thing to solve, but I think if the builders of the metaverse are cognizant about it, right, and I hope that we find good solutions in the future.
You mentioned scaling into social capabilities. Now you're going to enter the moderation game as well. How do you make sure that bad actors have a limited impact or no impact on the platform?
So first of all, we're going to be launching that in a very careful manner and learn and experiment with certain things. Of course, since it's blockchain, right, the moderators themselves, when you own a cafe or whatever in Upland, right, you are responsible what is happening in there, right, and such. So we have to set certain frameworks and certain principles for the moderators, for the owners, right, to create those spaces, right, and but we have to also be aware of, and unfortunately I'm always so sad when I read, Twitter, right, how people are, hating and so on. Hopefully we can create something which is a better system there, which is self-governed and where people cannot necessarily hide between, anonymity.
Dirk, on the geographic diversity front, do you see more adoption in developing markets?
we started out in the US. Our first city was San Francisco, and we launched, especially now in South America. Currently, Upland is only in English, so that is already some kind of barrier. We have a little bit Portuguese now in there because we launched in Brazil, but we're rolling out languages. I think once you have other languages, you become much other areas will join. However, today we only have roughly 35-ish% users from the US. The rest is really from, we have 10% now in Brazil because we launched there, and we have, we're doing more and more things in Portuguese. And we have probably 20-ish% from Europe, right? But where we completely underrepresented so far is Asia, but that's a clear strategy for us also to launch there very soon.
And do you see Upland becoming a place when people can have an economic activity like we saw in Axie Infinity and those kind of games, where it could become a more than a pastime or an entertainment moment?
Upland is already there, right? We already know that others are engaging others. We know that people have quit their daytime job, right, just to be in Upland and to make money. So eventually, this is more for developing countries because obviously not everyone's going to earn immediately $100,000, $200,000, which you need to survive in the US or so, right? But if you can earn, $30,000 or $40,000, which might be a lot of money in Vietnam, Philippines, and Africa, and so on. So I clearly see that, and that's also the vision, as I mentioned earlier. But we want to create that by having this entrepreneurial opportunities, right? So where people don't just speculate, they should create businesses in Upland and sell those. And when I'm now in Africa and now I'm creating some awesome looking outdoor decor items, like a virtual, garden bench or something, just an example, right? And you can sell that to other people all around the world. It could be super interesting, right? Or you create your own car in the future. And so there will be a lot of things which will be, help, to be more inclusive all around the world. And I think also that's why we're probably going to have less borders. The metaverse is borderless, right? You're going to have people coming together. We see that actually, by the way, to give you one concrete example, in San Francisco or in other cities in Chicago, virtual Chicago of Upland, we have people gathering together in so-called nodes because they have, like-minded interests. They're coming together even though they live in completely different parts of the world. It's really interesting to see. We call that virtual locality. So they have the feeling they're setting their home address there, then they creating these neighborhoods in a completely new way and so on. It's really fascinating to see. So that's the social aspect, which is very relevant. And then the economic aspect is that we're creating this, economies around certain things. Give you one example, it's also cars. So when I mentioned earlier, we introduced cars in Upland. So in Upland, when you want to produce cars, you need to have a plant. So a factory, or select a factory. Right, so we're going to work with. So we have our own car brand, which is called MV Motors, and we're also going to work maybe with outside brands, real world brands, who are going to produce cars in Upland. But then you need people who are going to run and operate maybe transportation services to transport the cars to showrooms. So there will be Uplanders who operate the transportation services. Other Uplanders going to operate the showrooms and car dealerships. Then there will be maybe also car racing will be damages. So the cars need to be repaired. So now you have a repair shop, right? And now you have a racetrack designer. You have, you can train the drivers, and it's a whole economy around cars, right? Just to give this one example, which we are going to create, where there's completely new opportunities for people.
Yeah, and who doesn't like cars? It's a universal thing.
So, Marc, are you already driving in Upland?
Me, no. I own a place in Upland, and I'm grinding a bit, but I haven't played with the cars just yet. So.
Yeah, they are very, very high demand. So actually, we have another car sale tomorrow. So we have, when we sell new cars, we have a wait list of 5,000-6,000 people coming in, and unfortunately, because they need to be produced, as I said, right? They take time to be produced.
There's a French games team in part of the Animoca group that does racing games. The guys from Eden Games, so they're very, very good blockchain cars being developed in the ecosystem as well. Well, Dirk, I mean, thanks for driving us through Upland. That's amazing. The complexity and the potential is fascinating. So switch gear a little bit and talk about OMA3. You're the co-founder and the chairman of the Open Metaverse Alliance 3. As you know, we're a big proponent on this podcast of the Open Metaverse. And, Patrick and I are actively involved in Metaverse Standard Forum. I know we're working together, but tell us, the goal of that organization and what you guys want to be doing and focusing on.
Back in late 21, I saw, there's a lot of blockchains, metaverses, or a platform for the metaverse have been created. But, then, maybe you can transfer some of the assets, because of blockchain and so on. But everything was not optimal. I said, what? That's not how it should be, right? We really want to build here something new, which is different from the existing so-called games, or they call themselves also metaverses, even though I'm a little bit reluctant to call them metaverses if they close. But the thing is, I said, okay, why don't we get together in one room? And I invited, like Sebastian from Sandbox was there, right? Animoca Brands, Decentraland. So all the big representatives came in. Was actually during NFT NYC, which is a big conference in New York, and it was in June last year. Said, hey, we want to create that. Do you guys think we should work together, right? And everyone agreed, and then we said, okay, let's do it. And then we started actually a so-called association, which is similar to foundation in Switzerland, and which has been formed now. And now we had actually over 1,000 companies have registered for it. And people can now sign up and become a member. There are different tiers of memberships. Actually, there's a URL called www.oma3.org if someone wants to sign up there. And we want to, drive forward, the idea of interoperability or omniportability. We want to drive forward decentralization. These are the principles. And most importantly, user-owned, user-controlled, right? The ultimate vision is somehow, if you come across, because I think especially with blockchain, we are on this, this heavy, paradigm shift. We're moving away from being platform-centric to a user-centric model. What that means is that I, as the user, will be able to go from one world to the other, take my assets with me, and take my identity with me, and maybe also my virtual money or what I have, which are basically part of the assets. And ideally, I have a locker, right? I can decide myself, okay, what will I take with me and what will I not take with me? So that is the ultimate goal. And here we have to come and approach that in several ways. In OMA3, we have now created the first 4 working groups. One is a legal working group. One is the ecosystem working group. Here we are also working together with the MSF, the Metaverse Standards Forum. I believe you are all a part of it, right? We have also we're in the process of creating a liaison agreement with them, because obviously everything with Web3 is more us, but lots of things we want to do is also relevant for the MSF, right? And, if you come up with file standards and so on, this is not something we should do on our own. I think we should do that together, right? As everything's just concerning Web3 and ownership is probably more us, but then the rest we want to achieve together with the MSF. And then we have 2 other working groups. One is called Asset Transfer Group, and the other one is called portaling. That means, can go through portal from one world to the other. So that's the first groups, but we adding more over time and adding more standard groups defining that, right? It's all new, and we're very close contact. I really like the partnership with the MSF, because I think that because at the end of the day we're driving everything. Also, Open Metaverse, even though the definition is a little bit different, right? However, there's also a lot of overlap.
We've been talking to a few people from OMA3. I mean, Patrick and I are more involved in the plumbing and making sure that, the mechanics of interoperability. We've been doing computer graphics for 30 years, and we are about to agree on a few basic things like materials and animation curves and a few other things. So I feel, we're in the belly of the machine trying to make things work. But then it will enable so many interesting conversation, because there are so many opportunities, and we're all going to converge on the same internet called the metaverse. So we'll have to talk together. But we're super, super happy to be working with you guys. So
Yeah, Dirk, and thank you for all the time you're putting into this industry service. We know how much work it is to be involved in these groups, and we expect the payoff is going to be really big. So.
Yeah, we have a little bit of challenge for, I think MSF has one advantage, right? It's big companies in there, right? Who can actually afford to give certain people. OMA 3 is still, it's me doing operational stuff together with, Robbie. I mentioned Robbie Young, with someone, executive director is Alfred Tom, Batista Median, none of you in the board. So it's for us, it's challenging, right? We're running a company and OMA 3. So hopefully we can also, we're in the process of thinking, oh God, how are we going to fund it a little bit further so we can actually hire people who can actually do also some of the work, right? So that's the biggest challenge we have at the moment, right? But it's always like that with standard committees. You have to do it on the side, right?
So Dirk, I was hoping we could switch gear, kind of a fun topic, and spend a minute on the Species Foundation, where you're mapping all the live species in digital form to create a unified, standardized repository to be used by any virtual world, game, or platform.
Yeah, so one thing, this is now an initiative coming out of Upland, and you can go to the website, www.species.io, where we have the first information about it. However, Upland is not going to launch it. We're just driving it to a certain level. So someone needs to kick it off, and there's going to be a foundation also in Switzerland, the Species Foundation. We're in the process of incorporating that to launch it. So what's the idea of Species? We said right now, when you think about species, which are basically animals or plants, right, which are out there right now. I mean, I researched a little bit. There's an understanding there's 8 million species out there in the world, even though only 1 or 2 million are documented. Others say, there's even 100 million species out there. It's a little bit hard to say how many are out there, but we know the most important ones, which are daily around us: cats, dogs, and so on. But we said, okay, it just doesn't make sense that every world is creating its own species over and over again. Yeah? And when we think about also again about interoperability or omniportability, how can this look like? And we came up with the idea, so why don't we create the standards where actually people where the, let's say certain forms of life are getting defined. And when you, the way it's going to work is that that someone can define, let's say, a gorilla, and can say, okay, I want to, set the standard for gorillas in the metaverse, and I'm going to say, how does it reproduce? How long does it live? So all the metadata, right? Also, how does it look? And we know there's currently maybe roughly 8 to 10 different designs, voxel graphics, of Unity, of Unreal, and so on, out there, right, where you could actually define how it looks. And it can always be extended, right, if something is missing. So once you have defined it, then you have to run it through a DAO, which is then the Swiss Foundation, and say, hey, this is how I define it. And then once the DAO accepts it, then you actually the gorilla standards can be adopted by the metaverses. But we have important is there, again, that's our blockchain background. There's always incentive loops for the metaverses to adopt it. Why would they do it? First of all, they don't need to create all those species, right? So we save a lot of CPU cycles, make it like that, right? Which is good for the environment. But also, we don't. It's just work which is redundant. You don't have to do it over and over again. So you save actually quite good some costs, right? If you want to do that. And but also for the one who created the standard, and also the who participating in creating that standard, so maybe some designers or so, they will continuously earn some royalties out of that species. So when someone, maybe concrete example, now opens up a quotation mark a gorilla shop in Upland and starts selling gorillas to other players, then right, some of that money can go back then to the original owners or creators of that standard. So that's the high level idea. We're currently starting working on the white paper, but as soon as this is out, right, of course you will hear much more about it.
It's a brilliant idea, actually.
And it's the first interoperable standards as such, right? Where it makes it's different, right? And instead of companies coming together, defining what's already there, now it's really bottom up. Let's see how it works.
Our last question on the podcast is asking you whether there is a person, institution, or organization that you would like to give a shout out to today.
So everyone who helps us to bring forward really the standardization, the open metaverse, right? I would really, hopefully we can all work together, right? And create what is different than what we have here today.
We do believe that we're witnessing an unprecedented level of collaboration across multiple industries and people who are not used to talk to each other. So it's a great moment. So thank you for being part of it, Dirk. I mean, that was truly amazing. I don't know if you have time to sleep at night between, the OME3 and building Upland as a full and governing Upland into a vibrant economy. That was amazing. Thank you very much for your time and driving us through all of those experiences in detail. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. Enjoyed it.
To our audience, thank you very much. We have a website now, buildingtheopenmetaverse.org, making progress. We actually have an email address, feedback@buildingtheopenmetaverse.org. If you want to reach us, let us know your feedback. Let us know what you want to talk about and who we should be invited to the podcast. So thank you very much to everybody. We'll be back with another episode.